The name Stonehenge is thought to come from the Old English or Saxon word stanhengen, which means stone hanging, because it kind of resembles what gallows looked like in the Middle Ages. You had two uprights with a crossbeam.
For ages, Stonehenge has loomed over the English landscape like a riddle carved in rock. A ring of towering stones shaped by forgotten hands for reasons that have puzzled generations.
Some of the stones at Stonehenge weigh between 50 and 70 tons. So how could you have moved these into place? How could you have moved them from Wales, where the blue stones, the spotted dolerite, came from within Stonehenge?
Was it a celestial clock, a sacred gathering place, or something even more mysterious? After years of excavation, scanning, and painstaking study, researchers now claim to have uncovered evidence that rewrites everything we thought we understood.
Now, to a layperson, this might not mean too much. But to Lubbock, this tells him exactly who built Stonehenge. And it is not who anybody expected.
What they discovered beneath the ground and inside the stones themselves tells a tale far more startling than any old legend. Step in as we uncover what they found. The Newall Boulder and the Secret of the Wanderer Stones. If you ever needed proof that archaeology can hinge on the tiniest, most easily ignored details, the story of the Newall Boulder is Exhibit A. Stonehenge may be a monument made of giants, but it was a small stone, barely the size of a football, that ended up cracking open one of its longest-running scientific mysteries. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't beautiful, and for almost 100 years, it wasn't even considered important. But like many forgotten artifacts, it was quietly waiting for the moment when science would catch up to it. And when it finally did, the results were nothing short of explosive. The Newall Boulder came to light roughly a century ago, during a time when archaeologists were still figuring out how to systematically record what they were finding at Stonehenge. Picture early 20th century excavations. Men in wool coats, notebooks, wooden crates, and a lot of educated guesswork. Among the tools, trenches, and scribbled diagrams lay this modest, lumpy stone. It didn't match the grand sarsens. It wasn't one of the dramatic blue stones standing proudly in the inner circle. It didn't even look special, just a rough, foliated chunk with a faint shimmer when hit by the right light. So they cataloged it, boxed it, and essentially forgot about it. For decades, it lived quietly among other stray fragments in museum storage, gathering dust and attracting absolutely zero attention. But appearances are deceiving. This stone had a story literally baked into its minerals. The Newall Boulder was small but strangely complex, fibrous in texture, faintly banded, and holding microscopic clues that wouldn't be readable until we invented the right tools. And when scientists finally took a closer look, it forced them to revisit a heated question. Did people carry Stonehenge's bluestones from Wales, or did glaciers drag them there naturally? For years, experts argued both sides. Some pointed to scratch-like markings as signs of glacial transport. Others argued the stones were deliberately shaped, worked, and positioned, too intentional for ice to explain. But without conclusive evidence, the debate simmered for decades. Then Professor Richard Bevans stepped in. Bevans and his team from Aberystwyth University weren't chasing myths. They were pursuing chemistry, the kind you can't argue with. Their approach was simple in theory but beautifully unforgiving in practice. Treat each rock like a suspect and run a forensic analysis. To do this, they turned to geochemical fingerprinting. If you've ever heard someone say rocks are all the same, this method proves the opposite. Each stone carries trace chemical markers, tiny signatures tucked inside minerals, that reveal exactly where it came from. In the case of the Newall Boulder, two elements took center stage: thorium and zirconium. These elements tend to form predictable patterns based on the geological history of their source. Think of them as the stone's DNA markers, unique, specific, and nearly impossible to fake. When Bevans compared the boulder's chemical profile with rock outcrops across Wales, one location lit up the charts: Craig Rosiphelan, a craggy, ancient landscape in North Pembrokeshire. The thorium levels matched, the zirconium levels matched, the microscopic features matched. It wasn't similar, it wasn't close. It was a geological exact match, And crucially, the stone showed no evidence of glacial abrasion, no smoothing, no telltale scraping, no rounding from rolling under ice. This wasn't something nature casually dropped off after a long ride under a glacier. This was deliberate. Craig Rossi Feline is a rugged storybook landscape. Sharp outcrops, dense woods, cool rivulets cutting through ancient rock. To the untrained eye, it's just another Welsh hillside. To archaeologists, it's a goldmine of clues. Excavations revealed clear evidence of Neolithic quarrying. Hollows carved from the earth where stones were extracted, wedge marks etched into the rock where ancient hands pried them free, tools abandoned in place, and earthen platforms carefully built to drag massive stones downhill. This wasn't some accidental patch of rock, it was a fully functioning prehistoric workshop, a site where humans transformed raw stone into monumental creations. Researchers dated the quarrying activity to around 3000 BCE, perfectly aligning with the earliest phases of Stonehenge's construction. And it wasn't just the Newall boulder that matched. Other bluestone fragments, including a buried piece known as Stone 32D, were revealed to be the same foliated rhyolite as the Newall boulder, another fingerprint pointing straight to Wales. And yet, this wasn't simply about matching rocks to quarries. The location carried significance. Craig Rossi Feline sits in a region with rich cultural meaning, ritual sites, ancient pathways, and evidence of organized communities that likely viewed stone not just as material, but as identity. The new evidence didn't just reinforce the human transport theory, it obliterated the glacial one. If glaciers had transported the bluestones, we would expect fragments scattered haphazardly across Salisbury Plain, rocks worn smooth by ice, and a random, chaotic distribution. Yet, none of this is the case. Instead, the stones appear only at Stonehenge, almost as if someone had carefully gathered them and placed them with purpose. Believing glaciers dropped the stones neatly where Neolithic builders needed them is like assuming furniture randomly appears in your living room. Convenient? Absolutely. Possible? Not really. Even the sarsens had to be transported and positioned by people. Compared to those behemoths, moving 3-ton bluestones from Wales wouldn't have been the hardest part of the project. Hard, yes. Impossible, no. The Newall boulder paints a striking picture of Neolithic Britain we often overlook. Communities working in concert, networks stretching across hundreds of miles, shared spiritual or cultural visions, and engineering skill far ahead of its time. This wasn't a chance. It wasn't nature lending a hand. It wasn't a happy accident. It was a deliberate, organized human effort. If a small boulder revealed such intentional movement, what could be said about the giants of Stonehenge, the towering sarsens that shape its iconic silhouette? The giants of the plain, tracing the sarsen stones. If you've ever stood beneath the towering stones of Stonehenge, you know they feel less like boulders and more like ancient skyscrapers, silent, immovable, impossibly heavy. But the truth is far wilder. These giants moved. The main pillars of Stonehenge, the iconic uprights and lintels that create its unmistakable silhouette, are sarsens, massive blocks of silicified sandstone hardened over millions of years into stone so tough it can spark against steel. Many weigh more than 20 tons, and the tallest rise over 7 meters into the sky. These aren't just large rocks. They're geological titans, the kind of stones that normally stay exactly where nature placed them. Yet Neolithic engineers looked at these monsters and essentially said, "Yeah, we can work with that." Their decision to build with sarsens is one of the most revealing clues to Stonehenge's meaning. When a culture chooses the biggest, hardest material available, they're making a statement about power, permanence, and unity. The mystery of the sarsens' origins unraveled thanks to a piece of stone that shouldn't have existed. A broomstick-sized core secretly removed from one of the pillars during a 1958 restoration. Robert Phillips, the man who pocketed it, kept the polished tube in his office, then his home, for 6 decades. Only when he turned 90 did he decide it was time to send it home. That innocent-looking cylinder cracked the case. With the returned core in hand, researchers finally had permission to perform tests that would have been unthinkable on the monument itself, cutting, grinding, dissolving tiny fragments to reveal a full geochemical fingerprint. Scientists combined this with portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, a tool that bombards surfaces with X-rays to read their elemental makeup. Then came the real detective work. Teams trekked across southern Britain, sampling sarsen outcrops from Wiltshire to Dorset, Devon to Oxfordshire. Dozens of sites were compared, measured, scanned, catalogued, and finally, the fingerprint matched. Stonehenge's 20-ton pillars came from West Woods, a high open ridge on the edge of what is now Marlborough. Today, it's a peaceful woodland full of bluebells, mountain bikers, and dog walkers. But 5,000 years ago, it was a stony plain littered with massive boulders just waiting for a civilization ambitious enough to move them. 50 of the 52 sarsens can be traced directly to this spot. It's as close to a smoking gun as archaeology gets. The kicker? The builders didn't even choose the closest stones. They chose the best, the biggest, the straightest, the most uniform. This wasn't about convenience, this was about vision. But the Westwood story is only part of the puzzle. One stone refuses to play by the same rules, the altar stone. Unlike the sarsens, its chemistry points far to the north, possibly Scotland, nearly 470 miles away. Imagine dragging a multi-ton slab across rivers, mountains, and moorland without wheels. Yet somehow people did it. How? We can only make educated guesses, but history offers clues. Indigenous communities in many parts of the world have shifted enormous stones using simple but ingenious tools. Thick ropes, timber sledges, wooden rollers, greased trackways, and water transport along rivers or coasts. All these technologies existed in Neolithic Britain. The altar stone's journey may have been long, slow, and brutally difficult, but it was absolutely possible. When people whisper words about Stonehenge, it's tempting to focus on the engineering, the ropes, the levers, the sledges being hauled by chanting workers in rawhide sandals. But the logistics, impressive as they are, miss the deeper truth. Moving these stones was a ritual. It wasn't just about getting rock from point A to point B. It was about gathering people, farmers, builders, clans, whole regions, into a shared mission. The effort itself forged identity. Pulling on the same ropes was, quite literally, pulling the nation together. This is why the choice of distant stones matters. Most Neolithic monuments were built with whatever rocks lay nearby. Stonehenge wasn't. Its builders went out of their way to select, fetch, and assemble stones from landscapes that held meaning. Political, spiritual, ancestral. Dragging giants across Britain wasn't a burden. It was an act of devotion. And maybe that's why Westwoods was chosen, not just for its size and quality, but because the journey itself carried significance. Every mile was a thread in a story bigger than any single community. As one researcher put it, the project wasn't just large. It was a big, concerted, deliberate act. The kind people remembered for generations. The kind that shaped identity. But here's the twist. Weight and distance alone can't explain Stonehenge's precision. The standing stones weren't just dropped into place, they were arranged with astronomical accuracy. So what if the stones weren't just transported but carefully calibrated? The solar code Stonehenge as a perpetual calendar. For thousands of years, people have stood before Stonehenge with the same puzzled expression. What on earth were these massive stones doing out here? Rituals, burials, a prehistoric power move? New research suggests something even bolder. Stonehenge may have been the world's earliest stone-built calendar, a device so enormous and so cleverly crafted that it kept perfect time long after its makers disappeared. And surprisingly, this idea isn't coming from fringe theorists whispering in the dark. It's coming from respected archaeologist Timothy Darville, whose study in antiquity reimagines Stonehenge as a brilliant and surprisingly elegant solar timekeeping machine. Darville's argument goes like this. The builders of Stonehenge weren't just stacking rocks in impressive formations, they were encoding the sky into stone. According to him, the monument reflects a count of 365 1/4 days, the exact length of the solar year. And the key isn't just in the shape or placement of the stones, it's in their number. Darville points out that the 30 great sarsen uprights of the sarsen circle weren't chosen at random. They form a continuous loop of 30 days, a perfect Neolithic month. Each month was broken into 3 neat 10-day weeks, marked subtly by 2 odd-shaped stones, S11 and S21, like ancient exclamation points dividing the flow of time. Complete 12 of those cycles, and you've got 360 days. Close, but not quite enough. The remaining 5 days show up right at the center in the monumental trilithon horseshoe. These 5 giant stones weren't just placed there for aesthetic drama. They marked the epigomenal days, those bonus days set aside for rituals, festivals, or possibly for reinforcing the authority of the elites who understood the system. But here's where the genius-level stuff kicks in. Every 4 years, a day had to be added to keep the calendar synced with the actual solar year. And for that, Stonehenge had the station stones, 4 stones forming a perfect rectangle. Their alignments allowed the builders to track when that extra day should be added. Leap year, prehistoric edition, a calendar this organized, this architectural, and this permanent, that's no accident. Even without Darville's numerical decoding, Stonehenge practically shouts its solar obsession. The monument is famously aligned with the solstices. Stand at its heart on midsummer's morning and the sun rises perfectly over the heelstone. Stand there in winter and the sun slips between the uprights of the tallest trilithon like a glowing bead through a stone needle. This isn't nature doing the aligning, this is deliberate engineering. The trilithons, sarsen circle, and station stone rectangle all work together like parts of a celestial instrument. These alignments weren't thrown together casually. They demanded knowledge, planning, and an understanding of the sky that rivals much later civilizations. For a society without writing, without metal, and with technologies we'd consider basic, this level of precision is breathtaking. What makes this so impressive isn't just the numbers, it's how seamlessly architecture and astronomy fold into each other. Imagine being a Neolithic farmer. Seasons aren't abstract. You live or starve depending on your timing. When should the barley be planted? When should animals be moved? When is it time to gather in massive feasts, honor ancestors, or celebrate the midwinter return of the sun? Controlling time meant controlling society. Those who understood the calendar held real power, and the land itself responded to their accuracy. Darville's theory suggests Stonehenge linked sky, earth, and community into one giant stone-coded calendar. But of course, this isn't the end of the story. Not everyone is convinced. Skeptics argue the calendar interpretation relies too much on numerical coincidence and similarities to Egyptian systems. Alignments don't always mean intentional design, and cloudy English skies make daily solar tracking difficult. Some researchers believe the structure was mainly ritualistic, a place where people marked solstices symbolically, not scientifically. Archaeologist Michael Parker Pearson, for instance, sees Stonehenge as part of a ritual landscape connecting life and death. Others emphasize its role as a cemetery, a gathering site, or a seasonal pilgrimage destination. Stonehenge may have been a calendar, but not only a calendar. More likely, it was a multifunctional monument whose meaning shifted over centuries: sacred, practical, astronomical, political, and deeply ceremonial. While Stonehenge's solar alignments are clear, the lunar story is murkier, but possibly just as important. Every 18.6 years, the moon hits its extreme, rising and setting points, something called a major lunar standstill. 2 of the original station stones align with this phenomenon. Archaeologists have wondered whether Stonehenge was also built to honor or track these rare moonrises, which would have been spectacular events. Early burials at Stonehenge concentrate in the southeast area, the exact direction of the moon's southernmost rise during the standstill. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. For ancient people, the moon wasn't just pretty. It provided nighttime light, tracked shorter cycles, and may have carried symbolic ties to death, ancestors, and the spirit world. Evidence from Durrington Walls, the settlement where Stonehenge's builders lived, reveals massive midwinter feasts. Animal bones show pigs were slaughtered in midwinter, people traveled from all over Britain to gather during the coldest, darkest days, a time when the sun seemed to stall in the sky and life hung in the balance. For them, midwinter wasn't just a seasonal event. Honoring the sun's return wasn't optional, it was necessary. Stonehenge wasn't the only monument aligned to the winter sun. Newgrange in Ireland floods with light at dawn on the solstice. Maeshowe in Orkney frames the setting winter sun. Bryn Celli DDU in Wales does the same. These widespread alignments hint at shared beliefs across prehistoric Britain and Ireland, that midwinter mattered, that the sun's rebirth was sacred, and that architecture could capture moments of cosmic significance. Yet for all its connections to the sky, Stonehenge doesn't just shape light and shadow, it shapes sound. And inside the circle, strange acoustic effects whisper a mystery even older than the calendar itself. The sound chamber, Stonehenge's hidden acoustics. For centuries, visitors have walked through Stonehenge expecting silence, an ancient monument frozen in time, whispering only through wind and weather. But modern researchers are discovering something unexpected. Stonehenge wasn't just built to frame the sky. It may have been crafted to shape sound. And if that's true, the experience inside the stone circle would have been nothing short of magical. This experimentation started with a team of acoustics engineers from the University of Salford, people who spend their days not staring at the stars but listening for echoes, vibrations, and hidden patterns in the air. To them, Stonehenge posed a tantalizing question. What did this place sound like when it was whole? Sound mattered to prehistoric societies far more than we often imagine. Chanting, drumming, singing, spoken ritual. These weren't entertainment. They were tools of ceremony, identity, and connection. In a world without amplifiers or architecture dedicated to acoustics, shaping sound through stone would have been a powerful way to elevate a ritual from ordinary to unforgettable. The Salford team suspected Stonehenge's builders understood this intuitively, and to test the idea, they needed to recreate the ancient circle as it once stood. Enter Minihenge, a painstaking 1:12 scale model, and arguably the most adorable scientific masterpiece ever built. Using ultra-high-resolution laser scans from historic England, the team digitally mapped every surviving contour of Stonehenge. Angles, curves, cracks, missing stones, everything. Then they reconstructed the larger monument precisely as it stood around 2500 BCE, 157 stones in total, including those long vanished. Each miniature stone was 3D printed and coated to mimic the acoustic properties of real sarsen rock. The precision was so extreme that the replica captured not just the shape, but the sound behavior of the original stones. Inside the University of Salford's specialist acoustic chamber, they placed tiny speakers and even tinier microphones around and within Minihenge. Because the model was 12 times smaller, every sound had to be increased to 12 times the usual frequency, meaning all testing happened in the ultrasonic range. A prehistoric soundscape, heard by modern equipment but beyond human hearing. It was a labor of love, as lead researcher Trevor Cox put it, and the most accurate attempt anyone had made to recover Stonehenge's original acoustics. And the results were almost unbelievable. Inside the circle, voices didn't just echo, they expanded. The stones amplified sound by over 4 decibels, a noticeable boost even today. That may not sound dramatic on paper, but imagine a single speaker chanting in the center and everyone within the stone ring hearing it with perfect clarity. No distortion, no echoes, just pure resonant sound. But step outside the circle and everything changed. The noise dropped dramatically. Conversations at the center became muffled ghosts, barely escaping the stone boundary. The monument acted like a sound bubble, transparent from within, opaque from outside. This wasn't accidental. Stonehenge's arrangement traps sound horizontally, bouncing it back into the circle again and again. Cox described it perfectly. You'd think the sound would just fly into the heavens, but instead it keeps circulating. It's quite magical. The findings suggest something profound. Rituals at Stonehenge were designed to be experienced differently depending on where you stood. Inside the circle, the soundscape would have been immersive and sacred. Outside, it would have been distant and inaccessible. A private auditory world, open only to those allowed within. The team also tested different historical configurations based on archaeological phases. Whether stones were rearranged, added, or removed, the acoustic differences were surprisingly small. To a prehistoric ear, the effect would have felt consistent over centuries. While astronomy still seems to have dictated the primary layout, the acoustic bonus features indicate that sound was valued, appreciated, and perhaps even deliberately enhanced. And Stonehenge wasn't silent even when no one spoke. On windy days, researchers say the stones themselves hum faintly, creating a natural tone that some have likened to a low drone or shifting musical resonance. Certain smaller stones, known as ringing stones, even behave like gongs when struck. In 2013, researchers at the Royal College of Art managed to play them like an ancient xylophone, creating eerie metallic tones that echoed across the site. It's hard not to picture ancient people discovering these sonic quirks and weaving them into their ceremonies, sound becoming as sacred as sight. The acoustic evidence suggests that Stonehenge wasn't just a solar calendar, a cemetery, or a ceremonial gathering site. It was a carefully controlled sensory environment where sound, light, and architecture worked together to shape experience. Inside the circle, one would have felt enveloped, voices amplified, music swirling, chants rising and falling in a rhythm the stones themselves enhanced. Outside, the same rituals would have appeared distant, mysterious, perhaps even divine. This design creates a divide, not of walls, but of experience. A chosen few inside the ring participated fully. The many who remained outside could only watch, seeing ritual gestures but never hearing the words or songs behind them. In other words, Stonehenge may have been a stage for restricted ceremonies, an ancient inner sanctum of sound. When we think of prehistoric people, we often imagine simplicity. But Stonehenge's acoustics reveal nuance, intention, and creativity. The builders understood sound well enough to shape it. They created architecture that manipulated a sensory world, long before the word acoustic even existed. And this makes the monument feel a little more human. Stonehenge wasn't just a timeline etched in rock. It was a place where people gathered to hear, to feel, to be transformed by ritual. Of course, long before science offered explanations, earlier generations had their own. And their stories didn't involve acoustic chambers or 3D printers. They involved giants, magic, and a wizard who could command stones like soldiers. Legends of power, Merlin and the magical origins of Stonehenge. Long before archaeologists measured sarsens with lasers, Stonehenge lived in the world of myth. And in that world, one name towered above all others: Merlin. The wizard of Arthurian legend, master of spells, dragons, and the forces of nature, was said to have magically transported the Stonehenge, not with human hands, but with magic. The tale begins in the 5th century, after a savage massacre of British nobles by invading Saxons. King Aurelianus Ambrosius, uncle to the future King Arthur, wanted to honor the fallen with a monument unlike any other. Ordinary stones arranged by ordinary workers would not suffice. The king needed something eternal, something infused with power. Well, that's where Merlin came in. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century Historia Regum Britanniae, Merlin proposed a bold plan. In Ireland, he claimed, stood a circle of giant stones, what he called the Giant's Dance, placed there by ancient giants. These weren't just ordinary rocks. They were said to hold mystical healing powers. Merlin described them as stones of a vast magnitude and wonderful quality, mystical stones of medicinal virtue. The giants of old had brought them from Africa and used them for magical stone baths to cure sickness and wounds. King Aurelianus, skeptical yet intrigued, asked how anyone could possibly move such colossal stones across the sea. Merlin's response was simple: "Leave it to me." With magic, he could lift and transport the stones to Salisbury Plain, where they would stand forever, honoring the noble dead. To make it happen, the king sent his brother, Uther Pendragon, later famous as Arthur's father, at the head of an army of 15,000 soldiers to Ireland. There, they fought King Gillamanius in a fierce battle. Victory was hard won, but the stones still wouldn't budge. That's when Merlin, the magician-engineer, stepped forward. Using his supernatural powers, he carried the megaliths across the sea, arranging them carefully on the plain where they remain today, forming the circle that has captivated generations. This story is part folklore, part nationalistic poetry, and part ingenious medieval PR. Geoffrey's narrative wasn't just entertainment. It celebrated Britain's heroic past, mixing real historical memory with mythic imagination. The idea that stones could travel vast distances from Ireland or even Africa may preserve faint echoes of Neolithic feats. We know today that some of Stonehenge's bluestones originated in Wales, hundreds of miles away. The medieval mind transformed an impressive logistical accomplishment into a tale of giants, wizardry, and divine intervention. Merlin, as both prophet and engineer, occupies a fascinating middle ground between magic and technology. In the story, he isn't simply casting spells. He's designing a monument, solving a mechanical problem no human alone could tackle. It's an early recognition of skill, encoded in legend as something supernatural. The myth also carries political undertones. Uther Pendragon's expedition wasn't just a magical heist, it symbolized conquest, authority, and the projection of power. By claiming Merlin and Uther brought these stones from afar, Geoffrey reinforces the idea of Britain as a land of strength and ingenuity, a realm capable of controlling forces beyond human comprehension. Even the Giant's Dance itself has its own story. The stones were said to cure sickness through medicinal baths, echoing a belief in sacred healing landscapes. In a world without hospitals or doctors, attributing magical powers to distant stones gave the story both wonder and function. It explains why such strange, enormous rocks might have been venerated and transported, linking mythology, health, and ritual in one narrative. Why does this myth endure? Because it satisfies a psychological need to explain the unexplainable. Stonehenge is massive, precise, and mysterious. To medieval eyes, the engineering required to build it was beyond human capacity. Magic, giants, and wizards provided a narrative that was not only memorable, but emotionally satisfying. And yet, the Merlin story does more than entertain. It bridges centuries. Modern visitors, while no longer believing in flying wizards or giant magic stones, still feel awe at the monument. Ancient rituals, medieval imagination, and contemporary science all converge in the same place, giving Stonehenge layers of meaning across time. The myths preserve wonder while the facts reveal human ingenuity, transporting stones, aligning them with the sun and moon, orchestrating ceremonies, and shaping sound within the circle. The legend reminds us that generations of people looked at a circle of stones and saw something extraordinary, something worthy of stories, reverence, and imagination. Medieval myth and Neolithic monuments intertwine, leaving behind a tale as enduring as the stones themselves. Yet while myths sought to elevate the monument, the centuries that followed nearly destroyed it, as human neglect, treasure hunters, and natural decay tested the endurance of Stonehenge's magic. The silent wounds, centuries of vandalism and modern threats. Stonehenge has faced many enemies over the centuries, but the most persistent and surprising one has been people. Long before the site became a protected national treasure, humans chipped away at it piece by piece. By the 17th century, stones were disappearing, hauled off to build houses, roads, and other projects. Fast forward to the 19th century, and visitors were scooping small fragments with chisels as keepsakes, unaware that these tiny acts were slowly eroding history. The 20th century didn't spare the monument either. In the 1970s, the annual Free Festival brought crowds to Salisbury Plain. The first few years seemed harmless, but by 1978 authorities had no choice but to fence off the area. In the 1980s and 1990s, vandalism escalated, A notorious 1984 incident saw purple spray paint daubed across the stones, prompting exclusion zones, police patrols, and even temporary closure. In 2008, 2 men chipped a piece off the heel stone no bigger than a 10-pence coin, the first recorded attack in decades. And in 2020, plans for a controversial tunnel nearby drew protests, with historian Tom Holland condemning it as unbelievable destruction. Even modern climate activists have targeted the stones. On June 19, 2024, Just Stop Oil smeared orange cornflower paint on 3 monoliths. Thankfully, the powder washed away with no lasting damage, but the incident highlighted how fragile the monument remains in human hands. Today, Stonehenge appears as a partially ruined circle, but originally it was complete, towering sarsens connected by lintels, forming a perfect ring. Over the centuries, some stones fell to weather and erosion, while others were deliberately removed or toppled. Archaeologists rely on early photographs, sketches, and reconstructions to imagine its original splendor. And yet, these missing pieces only add to the monument's haunting mystery. Evidence even suggests Stonehenge may have been abandoned before completion. Gaps in the circle and incomplete alignments hint that the original design was never fully realized, perhaps due to societal collapse, changing religious beliefs, or other unknown shifts. Activity declined around the Bronze Age, suggesting a gradual change in priorities. In its unfinished state, the site has an eerie beauty, a monument both complete and incomplete, echoing the mysteries of its creators. Stonehenge was not only a celestial observatory but also a place of the dead. Excavations have uncovered hundreds of cremated remains, more than any other Neolithic site in Britain. Many of these were placed near significant stones, linking burial practices with celestial alignments, especially the winter solstice sunset, symbolizing death and rebirth. The monument may have functioned as a sacred space to honor ancestors, where the living and the dead intersected in a ritualized landscape. By the early 20th century, the stones themselves were in danger of collapse. Wooden props held up leaning monoliths, and parts of the circle teetered precariously. At this point, Stonehenge was privately owned by the Antrobus family, who had cared for it since the 19th century. In 1915, the site went up for auction and was purchased by Cecil and Mary Chubb for £6,600. They gifted it to the nation on October 26, 1918. English Heritage Chief Executive Kate Maver credits the Chubbs' generosity with saving Stonehenge, transforming it from a neglected ruin into a protected national treasure. Cecil Chubb was later knighted, and the couple became Sir Cecil and Lady Chubb. Thanks to their foresight, government conservation efforts could begin in earnest. Fallen stones were reset, twisted monoliths were straightened, and the landscape itself was stabilized to allow visitors to appreciate the monument safely. Without their intervention, Stonehenge might have disappeared entirely under centuries of neglect and human interference. Yet human impact continues even in subtle ways. Climate change, erosion, and the sheer weight of foot traffic remain persistent threats. Preservation is a delicate balancing act. How to allow people to experience Stonehenge while protecting it for future generations. Fences, guided paths, and careful visitor management now help mitigate damage, but debates over access versus conservation continue to this day. Stonehenge has endured medieval and early modern plundering, souvenir hunters, festival crowds, and even modern protest. Through all this, one fact emerges. Stonehenge wasn't designed to impress from a distance. Its genius lies in the experience itself, from the precise astronomical alignments to the carefully amplified acoustics and the enduring myths that cloak it in mystery. Stonehenge is an active monument. It is a cosmic instrument, a ritual stage, and a spiritual observatory, all meant to be experienced from within. Despite everything Stonehenge has endured, one final question remains. What hidden pattern ties its stones, sounds, myths, and alignments into a single purpose? Or is it really a magical monument that the Merlin legend suggests? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.